Yeah, I will be talking about the Agora project I'm doing at the University of Amsterdam. And I will be talking about online museum and its contribution to E-humanities and the hermeneutics of access. I always enjoy these pictures of André Malraux preparing his book Le Musée Imaginaire. And the first edition of this book was published in 1947 and translated as Museums Without Walls. And this is of course a curious translation. For why was the book not translated as The Imaginary Museum? Perhaps because the title Museum Without Walls was meant to capture the central message of Malraux's book. For the museum is not a building, it's an album that enables its users to explore and study objects from different times and places side by side, where and when the user wants to. And this explains why several authors thinking about the online museum emphasize that Malraux anticipated the online museum and gallery. For the online museum, so they argue, is an album too. There's also a second and deeper relation between Malraux's project and the online museum that has not acquired the attention it deserves. The techniques that Malraux associates with his Musée Imaginaire are also techniques that can be associated with the exploration and study of digital reproductions of objects. In an online environment, objects from different times and places can be studied side by side. Grouping and regrouping artworks may lead to new insights and reveal, for example, a certain style. Reproductions isolate artworks and other objects belonging to our cultural heritage from their original surroundings, and they usually lose their relative proportions. Small objects are enlarged and large objects are made smaller. All of this enables us to see the object in new ways. The angle in which the object is taking, its framing and centering, its particular focus, all compel us to interrogate the image. And nowadays we are so accustomed to these techniques that we are hardly aware of them. These reproduction techniques, and this I take to be crucial, are techniques that support the interpretation of the object. And they are, in other words, hermeneutic devices. And the online museum is, I think, the museum without walls par excellence. In my talk, I will argue that the online access to cultural heritage requires a specific hermeneutic framework that emphasizes how users interpret cultural heritage with the help of information technology. It follows that methods and techniques that online museums use provide a specific and important contribution to our understanding of what is commonly referred to as E-humanities. And my focus is on the hermeneutics of access. A key challenge for museums is to support both the information need of its users and the process of interpreting objects. For it's crucial to prevent users from getting lost in a sea of images and objects that appear to be unrelated and without any context that allows their interpretation. And the object documentation typically serves heritage professionals and other domain experts and does not provide the necessary context suitable to a wide range of users. As a result, cultural heritage collections lose their potential appeal or remain undiscovered by a large amount of general users. In recent years, several research projects have worked with cultural heritage institutions to develop methods and techniques to provide access to and interpretation of objects in online museum collections. And the Agora project, in which I participate, is such a research project. It's a collaboration of the History and Computer Science departments of the University in Amsterdam, the Rijksmuseum, and Sound and Vision. And the hermeneutic approach is central to Agora. Now, hermeneutics is a theory of interpretation, and digital hermeneutics studies the relation between the human interpretation process and the digital applications providing or supporting that interpretation. In Agora, we believe that cultural heritage institutions need to find a balance between the provision and support of access to information on the one hand and the provision and support of the interpretation of objects on the other. They furthermore have to do so in a way that is suitable for a diverse range of online visitors. And this distinction between information and interpretation is often implicitly made in the context of application in the cultural heritage domain. And I want to make this distinction explicit for two reasons. First, the distinction obliges us to think about the limits of automation. Automating everything leaves no room for interaction between human beings and technology. And this interaction is crucial if we want to think of the internet as a means to engage with the world. So here the internet is about interpretation, leaving a good deal of what happens in the hands of human agents. Second, the distinction between information and interpretation helps us to think about the needs and demands of different users groups. For an expert may at one moment use an application as a reference work, counting on a trustworthiness of the information provided, whilst a lay user of the same application may want the freedom to do whatever she likes with what is offered. Digital hermeneutics is concerned with the limits of automation and modeling on the one hand, and the interaction of people and technology on the other. The reproduction techniques I mentioned before are to be understood from this point of view. Now, this distinction between information and interpretation corresponds to two conceptions of the online museum. We can conceive of the online museum as a collection of images and descriptions, an inventory of the world, asserting what there is. And here the museum is a storehouse of information, a database to be searched and browsed. By contrast, we can also think of the online museum as an exhibition of objects, a place to engage with the world, showing what the world can be like. Here the museum is a communication platform, an agora, a place of interpretation. And these two conceptions are not mutually exclusive, they are rather complementary. Now, this distinction between information and interpretation is central to the understanding and evaluation of online access to cultural heritage. And we can further elaborate on this distinction by distinguishing between the provision and support of information and interpretation, manually and automatically generated information and interpretation, and between user-orientated and expert-orientated applications. I will give you some examples. A wiki is prototypical of providing factual information. An institutional wiki may be in full control of its expert staff, manually adding and updating object descriptions in their information system, which may in part be accessible by the public. Text extraction techniques automatically provide information, whereas search and browse techniques are typical of the automatic support of information finding. An application also supports information if it allows its users to add comments and add and tag objects. Presenting a story about one or more objects, for example in an online exhibition, or simply as a text, is prototypical of providing an interpretation, whereas an application suggesting narrative relations is prototypical of what we mean by supporting interpretation. Writing a story in an online environment manually adds an interpretation, whereas interpretations are automated when relations are generated automatically. Engaging users in a curation process may lead to new insights, both for users who can thus share their knowledge and for the institutions who may benefit from the knowledge their users have shared with them. Automating part of the information process may also be beneficial to the museum, for it helps them to curate exhibitions online and offline. Now, some applications are by their nature user-orientated, others are expert-orientated. The distinction between information and interpretation thus helps us to evaluate online access to cultural heritage. And we can deepen our understanding of this distinction by understanding it as a distinction between description and narration. Description and narration serve different goals. We use descriptions to identify something or someone, and we use narratives to communicate the significance of someone or something. The metadata of objects in cultural heritage institutions are used this way. metadata structures the object information with the goal of identifying the object and relating it to other artifacts. They also make possible techniques for searching and browsing. Stories, by contrast, help us to interpret and value objects. Moreover, it's precisely in virtue of a story that an object is significant historically or otherwise. The distinction between description and narration, information and interpretation are mostly implicitly present in the many essays written on virtual museums. And there are two reasons for this. First, from its inception, museums have made use of objects' descriptions to document and identify the objects in their collection. Narration, on the other hand, was a model that was used to exhibit objects. Information systems built for museums are based on this descriptive tradition of documentation. Second, computation seems to have more in common with description than with narration. Databases, vocabularies, tools for text mining and extraction techniques, they are all based on the model of description. The distinction between description and narration, identification and significance, documentation and exhibition is central to the Agora project. In Agora, we facilitate users to make their own stories. It's up to them to determine what the significance of some object is by constructing a narrative about it. A first step is to enrich objects with events. In Agora, we use the simple event model. Events are characterized by the properties actor, time, place, and type. And this event model serves to identify events, and in the context of Agora, to relate events to objects. And it thus provides a method for the first step of interpreting an object. A second step is relating events to other events in what we called proto-narratives. And these proto-narratives are automatically suggested to the users. And we distinguish between a conceptual, biographical, and topological proto-narrative. At this moment, we have some demonstrators on our website, and we are currently working on a project's final demonstrator. And you can see we have object information enriched by links to external sources, objects related to events, and objects related to the proto-narratives. And I will now finish up. I hope you have made clear that this hermeneutic approach, in a sense, contributes to our conception of E-humanities. When we talk about E-humanities, we usually talk about big sets of data and the search for patterns in those data. But as against this view stands the conception of E-humanities that starts with the study of cases, with people, objects and events, with the aim of providing and supporting narrative interpretation of those cases. And in this second conception is where the contribution of the online museum can be found. And here computation serves interpretation rather than calculation, close reading rather than distant reading. Now, I hope to have shown that this hermeneutic approach helps us to understand and evaluate online access to cultural heritage. It helps us to analyze and theorize about application providing such access, and in a very short way how it contributes to our understanding of E-humanities. And this is my take-home message. Online museum requires a hermeneutics of access, and cultural heritage institutions need to find a balance between the provision and support of information and interpretation. Thank you.